to Regal.
The 1920s was a decade of exciting social changes and profound cultural conflicts. For many Americans, the growth of cities, the rise of a consumer culture, the upsurge of mass entertainment, and the so-called revolution in morals and manners represented liberation from the restrictions of the country's Victorian past. During this time, entertainment and media were huge factors in the way that life was lived during the 1920s. There are many parts as to why entertainment and media grew so fast in popularity. Print, radio, and movies had a big impact at the time, but nothing was as influential to society as the Jazz Age. Media underwent quite a shift. It shifted from print-based journalism to electronic media, and the competition between them only grew. It was quite minimal though, as radios were not the most effective news medium at the time, although people still did listen to radio bulletins for short summaries of what was going on. Tabloids and broadsheets were much more popular for people who wanted to know more, although as we got later into the 1920s, radios, as they became more popular and more affordable, became the more accepted way of learning about what was going on. Radio programs began in 1920, and there were only 4 at the time, but by 1922 there were over 600. The first radio program was on August 31st, 1920, by a station called 8MK in Detroit. The company RCA, otherwise known as Radio Corporation of America, was founded in 1919, and they were based in New York. Being one of the first big electronic companies in the world, they mass-produced radios. They created the first American radio network known as the National Broadcasting Company, or more commonly known as today as NBC. Silent movies were popular until the early 1920s, when the first introduction of sound came into it, with orchestras that accompany the movies. The American Telephone and Telegraph Company, otherwise known as AT&T, invented the first disc recorders, amplifiers, microphones, and loudspeakers. In 1922, AT&T began working on something that could sync audio and video, and they created the Vitaphone. The Vitaphone would be on the same motor as the film reels, and they would start at the same exact point, so that way the audio and video would be as synchronized as possible. Charlie Chaplin was considered one of the most pivotal stars of early Hollywood. His most popular character was named Little Tramp. He acted and directed 35 movies as Little Tramp. He started his own production company with 4 other actors named the United Artists. Charlie Chaplin as an actor took a lot of risks. He played very controversial roles at very controversial times. The scene being shown is from one of his more popular movies, Modern Times. And this scene shows exactly what he was willing to do to become famous. Charlie Chaplin himself, though, wasn't one of the greatest people around. He was remarried 4 times and had a total of 11 children. He was, although, considered one of the greatest filmmakers in American cinema. The Jazz Singer, first shown in 1927, was the first film to have completely synchronized sound and film. It also had dialogue and completely synchronized lip singing.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you, you ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. No, listen, play Toot Toot Tootsie, 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead. Nothing but blue skies from now on. You like that, Mama? Yeah. I'm glad of it. I'd rather please you than anybody I know of. Oh, darling, will you give me something? What? You'll never guess. Shut your eyes, Mama. Shut them for little Jackie. Oh, I'm going to steal something. I'll give it back to you someday, too.
In the beginning of the 1920s, there came a lot of things, but the biggest impact was the Jazz Age. Improvisation was a new way of playing jazz that came along with the Jazz Age, and improvisation was a way of playing jazz that is made up on the go. Duke Ellington was one of the most famous composers, bandleaders, and pianists of this time. He was extremely famous, along with Louis Armstrong, George Gershwin, and Bessie Smith. Nightclubs became a very big thing at this time. They were referred to as speakeasies, and they were mainly run by gangsters. Most clubs were only open for days or weeks at a time because they sold alcohol illegally, but many in New York still stand today, including the most famous one, the Cotton Club. The Cotton Club began in 1923, and it still stands today, just in a different location. It was operated by a gangster named Oni Madden, and he used the Cotton Club to sell beer during the Prohibition. For the members, there was extreme segregation, only really allowing white people to be part of it. But as for the staff and the performers, it was almost exclusively African American. It was closed in 1935 at its original location, and it was reopened in 1936 on Broadway Street. Duke Ellington was the exclusive band leader at the Cotton Club for 4 years, but then he was on and off for the rest of his career. The 1920s were extremely influential on today's print and radio, movies, and music, with the 1920s bringing in radio, bringing in sound to movies, and bringing a whole new different kind of jazz.